1 module, Job Search Mistakes to Avoid. We're going to cover a number of types of mistakes in this presentation. Certainly, by the time you reach the point of accepting a job, negotiation is an important factor to consider because you want to get what you're worth. And so there are a number of negotiating mistakes that we'll look at. But before you ever get to that point, of course, you're going to have to learn how to handle interviews. And there are certainly a lot of pitfalls there, a lot of landmines, if you will, that threatened to end an otherwise successful application. But before you get that far, there are resume and cover letter mistakes that job seekers make over and over and over again that you'll need to be aware of. And before you get to that point, networking mistakes. This is probably the area in job search where the most mistakes are made, and the reason is because some of the worst mistakes you can make in networking seem like the right move to make. And so people make them over and over again and don't even realize that they were mistakes. So we'll tackle those issues as well, because of course this is all about uncovering job opportunities, and if we don't do it right, we're not going to do that. And before we get to networking, our overall approach needs some attention as well, because here too there are some critical mistakes that people make. So we're going to look first of all in section A at the overall approach mistakes that people tend to make. Mistake number 1 is not keeping track of your accomplishments. Now, this mistake goes back even before you begin your job search, while you're still at your last place of employment. Now, some of you who are watching this might already be in job search. Perhaps you've left your previous job or been downsized or something of that nature. And in that case, it's too late to rectify this mistake now. But it's not too late to keep from making it again. The reality in the new millennium, folks, is that job search is a fact of life. The days are long gone where people spent their entire careers with the same company in the same role. It is very common for people to change roles, whether by choice or by circumstance, maybe every 4, 5, 6 years. And so you can make it a lot easier on yourself if you keep track of your accomplishments. Now, if you've taken the resume building e-learning module, you know what I'm talking about, accomplishments. It's those moments where you made a difference in your job performance, so that rather than just telling people what your responsibilities were in your previous role, you're actually telling them where you saved the day, where you made a difference, where you stepped up to the plate and really accomplished something. So keep track of them. Instead of forcing yourself to have to think back over the course of your previous role, keep track of them maybe every year. Make a point of sitting down and looking them over, updating your list so that when you are in job search, it's easy to recount them. Mistake number 2 is leaving your former company on a bad note. Now again, some of you may already have left your previous role, and perhaps you would look back and acknowledge that, you know what, things didn't go as smoothly, as professionally, as dignified as you would have liked. Well, it's not too late to fix that in most cases. There's nothing stopping you from reaching out to a former manager or former colleagues, especially if things on the day of your departure, or the day of your dismissal, were less than congenial. Then you know what, reach out to them and let them know that you do respect and appreciate them and the time that you had to work with them and appreciated those things. Because when you leave your former company on a bad note, for starters, it's bad strategy, because you're going to need referrals and recommendations from the people that you worked with previously. So that can come back to bite you just from a strategic point of view. But it's also a bad idea just for your own perspective and your own peace of mind, because when you leave with your head held high, that feels good for the rest of your life when you maintain your professionalism and your dignity. When you leave taking a parting shot across somebody else's bow, you know, somebody that you felt didn't treat you as well as they should have, believe me, I understand the temptation to do it, but there's not a lot of long-lasting satisfaction from that. It feels good for maybe 5 minutes until you get to your car and you realize that there's something way zingier that you could have said. So there's just not a lot to be gained by leaving on a bad note. Burning bridges behind you is not good strategy, and it doesn't make you uh, feel the way you need to in order to enter your job search with the right framework, mental framework. You've got to have a positive thought about your future. And when you leave on a bad note, that's hard to do because you're constantly looking back and you're bitter, you're stewing about things that you no longer have any control over. And it's difficult to focus on the things where you do have control. So this is a mistake as well. Mistake number 3 is ignoring the need to account for your time. Now, this won't come into play immediately because when you leave your company, people are always asking me things like, well, when should I update my LinkedIn profile to reflect the fact that I'm no longer with the ABC company? There's a bit of a grace period where you can still say, you're working at such and such a company on your profile. And if it's a month or so down the road, nobody's going to question that. But there does come a point when your job search extends. And by the way, the average job search in Canada is about 4 months. The average job search in the US is about 8 months. So it's not unusual at all to reach the point where we're 4, 5, 6 months in to your search. There's a tipping point where now when somebody looks at your profile and it still says you're at the ABC company, and suppose they try to reach you there, do you really want someone to say, no, he hasn't worked here for months? See, that's not really the impression you want to make with networking connections and potential hiring managers and headhunters, HR folks, and so on. So there is a lot of value in being able to say in the interim what you've been doing. When somebody says, so what have you been doing for the last 6 months? You can say, well, I've been looking for a job. But it's so much more effective to say, I've been looking for a job. I've been doing some upgrading of my certifications, taking some classes, engaging in some volunteer work, engaging in a career transition program like the one that you're in now with Career Now, that can help to reevaluate your career trajectory and decide on some modifications that you wanted to make. Those things, when you can cite the things that you've been doing, it shows the person you're talking to that you're not a couch potato. You're not just sitting around. You're not casually looking for a role, but rather you're busy. You're engaged in a lot of different activities, and that says a lot about you as a potential employee. So this is a mistake too, to just figure that there's no need to really do anything while we're engaging in our search. Mistake number 4 is being disorganized. It is easy at the beginning of your search to keep track of all of the appointments and the data that you are collecting, names and phone numbers and appointment times and promises to reconnect with folks. But you're going to reach a point pretty quickly where the volume of that data is too much to remember. And when you let opportunities slip through the cracks, you're missing out on potential jobs. And so that can cost you. It can cost you a lot. Not only that, but even those that you do follow up on, if you're later than you said you would be, it doesn't enhance your image. It hurts your brand, really. And so this is a mistake as well. Mistake number 5 is failing to think outside the box. There is we'll call it a formula in most people's minds as to how you do a job search. Now, for starters, that formula is often flawed on the part of most job seekers. They figure that the key to job search is visiting job boards and scouring ads that are listed there, and perhaps touching base with an agency or a recruiter to see what connections they can make for them. And that's pretty much it. Well, that formula doesn't work very well. And if you've taken the job search, the networking for job search e-learning module, you've learned how flawed that approach is. There's a much better way of going about your job search. But even when you've got the better approach in mind, leveraging your networking connections and so on, there's still a need to be willing to think in an innovative way. I can tell you a lot of stories about people who have taken an innovative approach to their job search and gotten really good results. And by doing things that most people wouldn't think of. Now, before I tell you what those stories are, I want to point something out to you. There's a difference between being innovative, thinking outside the box, and doing something that's going to be perceived as weird. We don't want to do that. So there's a line. But we do want to think in innovative ways as to how we can get the results that we're looking for. One of the fundamental things that you need to achieve in your job search is to get the attention of the hiring manager. So with that in mind, let me tell you this story. There was a young man who graduated from college, and he put together a target list of 6 companies that he wanted to work for. And he happened in his studies to come across a piece of information that most people might not have thought much of, but he recognized that this was an area of possibility. It was something that he could leverage. That piece of information was simply this. He heard that hiring managers, and especially CEOs and top executives of major corporations, often have the habit of Googling themselves. They'll look up their name and the name of their company on Google or some other search engine, and they do this on a regular basis because they want to know what the chatter is out there about their corporate brand and about them themselves. Knowing this, a light bulb went off over his head, and he realized, hey, I can use this. And what he did was he went out and spent a few dollars, maybe $75 to $100, and he registered a half a dozen internet domains. Now, the domains were based on a little bit of research he did. He did some research to find out who the decision makers were in those half a dozen corporations that he wanted to work for. And so he went out then and registered the domain names that corresponded with the names of the CEOs, the decision makers in those corporations. So imagine that executive now who does a Google search for his name, and he finds that there is a internet address titled heyjonathansmith.com, his name. Well, if you were that executive and you saw that website, what would you do? Well, naturally, you're going to click on it and see what it is. And what do you think he found there? He found our intrepid job seeker's resume and a presentation as to why he would make a great candidate for a role in their corporation. Now that is thinking outside the box. How much work would it have taken him to get the attention of a half a dozen of those top decision makers in these large corporations? Doing it this way, the results were very immediate. And just if you're wondering, from that effort, he got 4 interviews and 2 job offers. So that's a perfect example of thinking outside the box, finding a way to get results in an unorthodox way, to get noticed. Now, I can give you other stories. There's a lot of folks who have found innovative ways of marketing themselves where their resume is concerned. Now, I mentioned earlier the line between what's innovative and what's going to be perceived as weird. Well, a lot of that has to do with the context and the relevance of the thing that you're doing to get noticed. For example, you may have seen this. There was a very viral email that went around a few years ago of a man who was, he put together a cartoon, a Java cartoon of his resume, and it was a caricature of him, a cartoon caricature of him walking through this cityscape, rapping his credentials. And this thing went viral. Everybody was watching it. Everybody was having a good laugh over it. It was quite funny. But now you might be thinking, is that over the line of weird? Well, it might have been, but for the fact that this man was a cartoonist. He was a Java programming cartoonist. So that this cartoon resume was in fact a demonstration of the quality of his work. So that goes from being a little odd to being genius. Or somebody else took their resume and had it printed on the wrapper of an oversized novelty chocolate bar and submitted that for his application. Now again, that could be perceived as weird until you realize this man was in sales. He was in marketing. Again, now it's genius. It's relevant to what he does. You get the idea? There's a lot of tech folks who have done a very simple thing like putting a QR code on their resume or on their business cards. That's those quick response codes that you scan with your smartphone and it takes you directly to a website. Well, you put that on your resume or you put it on your business card. And when people scan it, where do they go? They go to your LinkedIn profile or they go to a blog with you on video, again, delivering your presentation. There's a lot of different possibilities there. And if you're in tech, well, that's a very smart thing to do, isn't it? Because again, it's showing you're tech savvy. So there's a lot of examples I could give you, but I think you get the idea. Think outside the box in a way that's going to show your value to get the attention of the hiring manager. I'm not saying you have to do that every time, but when you perceive an opportunity, follow through on it because it can't hurt. Well, I guess it can if you do something really weird, but if you find something that actually is relevant, you may find that it makes a big difference. So mistake number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. Rather than doing these the wrong way, let's make sure we do it the right way. Instead of not keeping track of your accomplishments, get in the habit of updating your resume once every 6 months to a year while you're at your job, and you'll make it a lot easier on yourself in the future. Instead of leaving your former company on a bad note, maintain your professionalism and your dignity. It will pay dividends both mentally, emotionally, and in terms of strategy in your search. Instead of ignoring the need to account for your time, get active in ways that will be relevant and impressive when you're asked in an interview or at a networking meeting, what have you been doing for the last X number of months? Instead of being disorganized, keep good records of your progress so that you follow up when you said you would on all of these different leads that come your way, and don't let opportunities slip through the cracks. And instead of failing to think outside the box, be creative in the way you approach the market. Find a way to get noticed. Now, for this section, these are the general mistakes that we want to avoid for our overall approach. But you know what? There are also some doozies that you certainly want to be aware of. Doozy number 1. When you close a meeting, now it could be a networking meeting or it could be an interview. If you close your meeting passively, you're making a big mistake. What I mean by a passive closing, this is what most people do, quite frankly. They will end that meeting with something like, hey, I'm looking forward to discussing this with you in greater detail. Here's my number, here's my email. Get in touch with me whenever it would be convenient. And then you wait. And then you wait. Now understand, a lot of times when people don't get back to you, it's not because they weren't willing to help you. They just got busy. So when you close meetings passively and leave it in their court, you may never get the response, even though they were willing to help you, just because it got buried and they forgot. So that is a mistake. That's a big mistake. Doozy number 2 is going to the other extreme, where you're too aggressive with your follow-up. You become a pest. You don't want that either. You want to find a middle ground between those two. Doozy number 3 is starting and stopping your job search while you await results. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen job seekers who they'll work and work and work to get an opportunity uncovered. And when they do, they take this stop the presses type of attitude where, all right, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not going to do any more networking. I'm not going to do any more interviewing until I see what happens here, because this looks promising. It's a company I'd like to work for. It's a job that really looks good, and that's what I want. So I'm going to stop until I see what happens. That's a huge mistake. Why? Because it may take weeks, it may take months before that opportunity plays itself out. There can be delays. There may be considerations like, oh, you know what, our budget figures we thought was going to allow for us to make this hire this quarter. Turns out we'll have to wait till next quarter. Or there can be all kinds of other delays of perhaps shorter duration that nevertheless cause you to sit and wait. Excuse me. To sit and wait, and you're just in anxiety all the while. And then what happens if that one doesn't turn out? And you've waited. What you thought was going to be a few days, it's turned out to be weeks or months. And now you got to start things up again. All of your networking connections have gone cold, and a number of other leads that you may have been working on, they've evaporated. And so now we've got this herky-jerky start and stop kind of a dynamic to our search. Not only is that counterproductive, but consider this. When you get an offer, or when you get close to an offer, this is a tremendous opportunity for you to leverage that reality, that opportunity, with all of the other connections that you've been making. Now, understand what I'm saying here. I'm not suggesting that you get aggressive and start drawing lines in the sand and approach everybody that you've been talking to and say, hey, you better hurry up and make a decision because there's another company who's about to offer me a job here. Obviously, that's not the approach you want, because that can turn people off and it can just ask them, or lead them to say, well, hey, all the best, and let you go. But rather, if there is some tact that we can weave in here, and you can approach the folks that you've been talking to and they're interested, but they haven't put an offer out to you yet. All you got to do is approach them with this kind of attack. Say something like, hi, it's me. I just wanted to touch base with you once again, see how things were looking as far as that position we were talking about, and to let you know, as I'm sure you can appreciate, that I've got a lot of other conversations that I've been having with other folks as well. And some of those conversations are now starting to reach their conclusion. And I'm at a stage now where I'm being asked to make some commitments and make some decisions. And I didn't want to go and make a commitment elsewhere until I found out exactly what was still on the table here with your company, because I was very interested in the role that we discussed the other day. So what a difference that is, eh? Rather than drawing a line in the sand, you very tactfully, very professionally let them know that, well, hey, yeah, there are some decisions that are going to have to be made pretty soon, but I'm very interested in your company. I'm very interested in your role. You're not threatening me. You're not just using me as leverage. Quite the contrary. You're telling me that I don't want to make a commitment somewhere else if there's still something here. So it's a totally different feel in the conversation, and yet at the same time, it lights a fire under that individual to make an offer if they are serious. If you've ever sold your house, it's very similar to the dynamic that exists there. If you've done this, you know how it goes. You put your house on the market, and there's all kinds of people that are coming through, and you're getting all kinds of feedback from your agent, and perhaps even some direct feedback from some of the people that you've interacted with who are saying, oh yeah, I really like this and I like that about your house. And you're thinking, awesome, I'm gonna make the sale. But nobody puts an offer on the table. Why? Because they're looking around to see if there's a better house. They like yours, but maybe there's a better one. Maybe there's a better bargain out there. And so it's like they've got one finger on you, but they're still looking around over here. Well, the exact same thing's happening when you're in job search. They're interested, but maybe there's a better candidate. And so they're taking their time and they're shopping around. Well, what happens with the house? When somebody finally does decide, okay, I'm ready to make an offer, what happens? All these other people who have been kind of dithering, when their real estate agent tells them that, hey, an offer's coming in on that house that you were looking at, all of a sudden they go, well, wait a minute. I want to make an offer too. And where you had no offers and you're starting to panic and you're thinking, hey, are we asking too much? Maybe we should lower the price. All of a sudden now you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 competing offers being made on that house. And you can actually end up getting more than you listed it for. That's how it works, right? It doesn't happen every time, but it happens a lot. Well, the exact same thing can happen in your job search if you handle it skillfully. If you're aggressive and draw lines in the sand and give people ultimatums, it probably won't. But if you handle it diplomatically and let them know that there are decisions that have to be made over here, all of a sudden you can find yourself in a position of tremendous leverage where you've got multiple offers. And now you're not picking out of desperation. You're looking at, well, what would be the best fit for me? So, doozy, I'll say so. If you stop and start your job search, none of that is ever going to happen. You've got to keep on working your networking connections and following through on interviews and staying in touch with those hiring managers for that to happen. So yeah, this is a big mistake when we take the hold the presses approach. So instead of closing meetings passively, let's set up your follow-up. Instead of saying, I'm looking forward to discussing this with you, here's my number, all you got to do is add one little thing. I'm looking forward to discussing this with you in greater detail, but I know you're busy, so I'll plan on following up with you next week sometime. But in the meantime, here's my number and my email. I'd certainly welcome an outreach from you as well. So you still give them the option of reaching out to you, but you set up the expectation that you're going to follow up with them. And then you won't appear pushy when you do because they expected you to. You said you would. Now, there will be the odd time when somebody might say, no, that's okay, I'll call you. And when that happens, all right, do what you're told. Don't follow up. But most of the time, 19 times out of 20, that's not the reaction you're going to get. In this day and age, people appreciate it. Busy hiring managers and recruiters appreciate it when you promise to follow up because it's one less thing on their to-do list. So set up your follow-up. Don't leave yourself in limbo where you're just waiting by the phone and not getting a call. And instead of being overly aggressive, don't go to the other extreme. Be sensitive to that vibe. You know, the one that says, yeah, you're pushing a little too hard? Be sensitive to it. Strike the balance between those two extremes. Follow up, but be sensitive when you followed up too aggressively and then back off. And instead of stopping and starting your search, continue to pursue other opportunities, networking conversations, and meetings and interviews right up until the moment that you put your name on a contract when you accept an offer from your new employer. Because that's how you get leverage. That's how you get negotiating strength when it comes to salary and compensation. So those are the overall approach mistakes that people need to be aware of. Now, section B, we're going to look at networking mistakes. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the area where people make mistakes and don't even realize it because they seem like the right thing to do. Some of the most fundamental errors you can make seem like a good move. So for example, mistake number one when it comes to networking is not doing it. There are three obstacles that people generally encounter when it comes to networking. One is I don't want to do it because I'm shy. Two is I don't know how to do it. And three is I don't have time to do it. Well, again, there is a networking for job search e-learning module that you need to listen to in order to understand the fallacy of those 3 positions. You have to network if you're going to access the hidden job market. And folks, that's 75% of the job opportunities that are out there. They're hidden. They're not submitted to recruiters or posted on job boards. So if you're not networking, you're restricting yourself to that 25% of the market, which incidentally is where the most competition is because those opportunities are in the public domain. So everyone's applying for them. The hidden job market is just that. It's hidden. So if you can tap into it, you'll be one of very few, perhaps the only person who's in the running for that role. So huge mistake to not network at all. Mistake number two is putting pressure on your contacts. Most people think that the goal of networking is to get the people you network with to take your resume and forward it on to the hiring manager, to put in a good word for you, to keep an eye out for you, to let you know if they hear of any opportunities in the future. No, that's not the goal of networking. All that does is put pressure on your contacts because it makes them feel like you expect them to find your job for you. And who's got time for that? They've got a job that they're busy with now. So putting pressure on your contacts or when you ask them to put a good word in for you, to take your resume to their manager, you're asking them to put their reputation on the line with their manager, and they may not want to do that for various reasons. Maybe they've never worked with you, or even if they have, maybe they're on thin ice with their manager, and this is just something that makes them very, very uncomfortable. That's when people either run from your networking overtures, or they give you platitudes where they promise to help and then they don't do it. So putting pressure on your contacts, no, doesn't work. Mistake number 3, not sending a thank you note. Not only does this make people like you when you show appreciation for the help that they offer you, when they agree to spend 15, 20 minutes with you over coffee and give you some advice and give you a referral, it's only right that you should thank them. But it is also good strategy, because when you make people start to like you, then they want to help you instead of doing it grudgingly. And it's an opportunity for you to stay in connection with them. One of the fundamental things that you need to do in networking is keep in contact with the people that you network with. It's not guerrilla warfare. It's not hit and run. It's not one and done. You got to stay in touch with them. And here's a perfect opportunity to do it. The very next day, or maybe the day after that, send them a thank you note for the time that they've spent with you. It's a great way to build up rapport and stay top of mind. Mistake number 3, well, connected to that, not staying in touch. It's not just the thank you note. There's all kinds of ways that you can stay in touch with your networking connections. Following up after they've given you a referral, how natural is it to ask them, well, hey, thanks for the referral. Would it be all right if after I talk to Dennis, if I give you a call and let you know how the meeting went? Well, of course they want to know. They're participating in your little soap opera now, and they've got a skin in the game. So they want to know how those conversations go. So there's another opportunity to stay in touch. Staying in touch with them by connecting with them on LinkedIn, sending them updates periodically, not too often, maybe every 3 weeks or so, letting them know how your search is going. This is a great way to stay top of mind. And that's when people get back to you with other opportunities that they hear about. But they won't if it was a one and done kind of a deal. They've forgotten about you. So you got to stay in touch with folks. Mistake number 5 is being too picky when it comes to your job search. It's certainly a mistake to go to the other extreme where we're desperate and we'll take anything, but you don't want to go to this point either, where you may be turning down roles that they're pretty good, but they're not 100% compatible with what you're looking for, but they're 90%, they're 85%. That can extend your search needlessly, and you may look back and regret turning down an opportunity. Not only that, even roles that don't appear to be even that good of a match, you'd be surprised how often those conversations can lead to another lead, another connection, another referral that will be a good fit. So don't be too quick to decide that, nah, that role isn't for me. Have the conversation anyway. You never know where it will lead. So these mistakes are ones that we need to avoid. Instead of avoiding networking because we don't know how to do it and we're shy and we don't have time, make the time. It's important, and learn how. That will take the fear away if you know what you're doing. So learn how to do it the right way. And instead of putting pressure on your contacts, take the pressure off when you approach them. Tell them, I don't expect you to know of an opening. That's not why I'm calling. I was just hoping that we could get together for coffee and talk for a few minutes. I'd just like some advice and the benefit of your experience. That's easy. That's no pressure. So sure, I'll get together, especially if there's a coffee in it for me. And instead of neglecting the thank you note, take this opportunity to give something back, even if it is just appreciation. Networking works best when it's a two-way street, and appreciating their assistance will go a long way to building a rapport and relationship with them in the future. And instead of doing the guerrilla warfare, one and done type of an approach, get in the habit of touching base regularly, just very quickly, to stay top of mind with those folks. And instead of searching only for the perfect job, be open to conversations that are at least close, and you never know where that might lead. So these are some fundamental networking mistakes, but here too, there are some doozies. Doozy number 1 when it comes to networking is spending a disproportionate amount of your time and energy on job search sites. I mentioned a moment ago that 75% of all job opportunities are in the hidden job market, which is accessible only through leveraging your networking connections. So does it make sense then that you would spend 90% of your time searching job boards, which is the other 25% of the pie? No. If 75% of your likelihood of success falls over here, then spend 75% of your time doing your networking. That only makes sense. So get your priorities, shall we say, straight in terms of where you're going to spend the majority of your energy. Doozy number 2, not practicing your networking pitch. The networking pitch is what enables you to begin conversations, to be able to get the ball rolling. Once we're in a conversation, most of us are a lot more comfortable than we are trying to get one started. Well, that's what the pitch is for. So practice your networking pitch. Practice how you're going to introduce yourself and how you're going to get the conversation started. And not only is this important in general, but it is especially important given that a lot of networking opportunities come unexpectedly. There are those that you will obtain because you sought them out. You set up a networking meeting and you've got an appointment, you're going to meet them at the coffee shop, and so you've got a chance to say, all right, here's how I'm going to start. And so you practice it. But how many other conversations could become networking conversations if you were prepared? In North America, part of our default conversation right after talking about the weather is things like, so what do you do? How's work? Are you busy? We've all had those conversations. Well, how easy would it be if we're prepared to use that as a transition into a networking conversation where we might say something like, well, actually right now I'm going through career transition, or I'm reevaluating my career path, and I'm looking at some possibilities in the ABC industry, and I've got the XYZ, the 1, 2, 3, and the elemental P companies on my radar. What I've been doing, and you're right into your pitch. Well, if we're prepared with that pitch, we'll take those opportunities. If we're not prepared, we'll let them go by. And when someone says, how's work? We'll just say, yeah, it's good. Because we weren't ready. And folks, those are opportunities that can lead somewhere. Networking conversations bring you leads. Leads bring you referrals. Referrals uncover opportunities. Opportunities lead to interviews, and interviews get you jobs. But it starts in many ways with the networking conversation. So don't wing it. Don't leave yourself where you're just kind of feeling your way through these conversations, because you will let a lot of them pass you by. And even the ones that you do pursue, you'll handle them clumsily. So get polished, get comfortable with that delivery, and you'll find that the results are a lot more to your liking. Doozy number 3 is where we start to feel desperate. Well, you may feel desperate. That can happen, and I'm not going to tell you that you just can't feel that way, because it's very difficult to just will yourself to not feel desperation if that's what you really are experiencing. But folks, I'll tell you, if you let that desperation or that frustration over the length of your job search spill into the tone and the message that you're giving your networking connections, you've got the stink of desperation on you, and it makes you less attractive as an employee. You've got to come across as being confident and poised and professional. As soon as you start to sound desperate, you're going to end up with a job you hate. And you may even find that it still takes longer because you make yourself less attractive that way. So let's not fall prey to any of these doozies. Instead of spending all of our time on job boards, let's make sure that we dedicate most of our energy to where you're most likely to yield results, and that is through networking. And instead of winging it with your networking pitch, be prepared for those unexpected opportunities that just fall into your lap sometimes. And just don't get that desperate tinge to your approach. If you know what it is you want, what your target is, that's going to help this. Because knowing your goal, having your goal clearly in mind actually makes the process of landing that role much more successful. And so you're less likely to have that sense of desperation in the first place. But when we're focused on our goal, we're not going to come across as being desperate. And that will enhance our desirability. Section C of our discussion has to do with resume and cover letter mistakes. And there's a number of them here too. Mistake number 1 is listing your current work information as the best way to contact you. If you're still working at your current role while you're conducting your job search, think about the message that you're conveying to me. If you submit a resume to me with contact information that is clearly at your current place of employment, aren't you basically confirming in my mind that if I was to hire you, you'd probably spend a good chunk of your time doing things other than the work that you've been given? And that if you're working for me, you're going to have one eye out the door because you're demonstrating that that's what you're doing right now. Even if you are listing information, a lot of people have a little bit of a business they might run on the side. Maybe they do some consulting work or something else. It could be unrelated to the role you're seeking. But we get to thinking that, well, I'll sound more desirable if I appear to be employed. And we can talk about that all day long as to whether there's pros and cons both ways there. Because the other side of that, of course, is that when a recruiter sees that you're available, he's going to be more interested in looking at you, whereas if he thinks that you're not available, he might not. But more to the point, if you put your current contact information as being the email or the phone number for your business. Now, if your business has your name on it, this might not be a factor. But what if your business has another name that's not immediately identifiable as being yours? Well, then again, even though you're giving me your personal business contact information, you're again making me feel like, nope, you're working for somebody else and you're not doing your job. You're spending your time looking for another job. Again, it conveys that negative thought that you wouldn't be giving me your best if I hired you. So that's a mistake. Mistake number 2 is focus on your own needs. Now, it wasn't that long ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that it was very common to open up your resume and your cover letter with an objective statement, right? Remember that? I'm looking for an exciting role in a fast-paced company where I can use my skills in A, B, and C. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I do want you to have that focus. That's important. You need to have your goals clearly in mind. As I mentioned a moment ago, that's going to make it easier for you to land them. But that's not the message that you want to convey in your resume. Why? Well, think about this. If I'm the hiring manager and I pick up your resume, I don't know you. And when I read an objective statement, I'm looking for this. It's all about you, what you want. I don't know you. How concerned can you possibly expect me to be about what you want? I haven't even met you yet. But you know I'm concerned about what I want and what my company needs. So if you change the tone, the focus of your resume and your cover letter, especially that opening paragraph, it might not affect what you talk about, but the tone, instead of it being, I want this, if you present the information more along the lines of, this is what I can do for you, you will find that the reader is much more interested in what you have to say, because now you're talking about their needs. So let's make sure we don't make that mistake. Mistake number 3, pretty self-evident, but boy, oh boy, I can't tell you how many resumes I see and cover letters that are just full of typos. That is a great way to get yourself eliminated from consideration immediately. Think about it, folks. You're giving me a sample of the quality of your work. And if it's full of mistakes, grammar mistakes and typing mistakes, spelling mistakes, are you going to make me want to hire you? Or are you going to make me want to think maybe not? I'll go with the guy who can string a sentence together. Even if your role really doesn't involve that kind of thing, and you might think, well, that's not really a fair estimation, it doesn't change the fact that psychologically, unconsciously, it still makes me think less of you. Fair or not, it's the reality. So give your correspondence, your resume and your cover letter, the attention that it deserves when it comes to proofreading. Mistake number four, pardon me, is being too wordy. It is important to convey a full and robust message in your resume. And again, if you take the resume building e-learning module, you'll learn about how to go far beyond what most people do in their resume, which is just give me a bulleted list of all of the duties that you had in your previous role, and you instead give me accomplishment stories where you show where you made a difference in your previous company. Oh, just night and day, the impact that it makes. So we're telling a more detailed story in some ways, but we don't want to let that lead us to be too wordy, because you lose the attention. You know what I'm talking about. Whenever you've had a conversation with somebody who drones on and on, they might be telling an interesting story, but if they just take forever to get to the point, you glaze over. You start thinking about what you're going to have for supper that night. You're not listening anymore. And when you do that in your resume, you know what happens? Instead of reading it, I start skimming it, or I just stop reading it altogether and I put you in the B pile. So we've got to find that balance between telling the story effectively, but also being concise. Don't give me any more words to read than you need to, but still tell the story in an impactful way. There's a balance to be struck there. Mistake number 5 is giving little thought to the aesthetics of your resume. Do not underestimate the importance of how your resume looks. For the same reason, when it comes to the question of typos that we considered earlier, it has an effect on how I view you. And often it's a subconscious effect. But when I see a resume that is messy, the formatting is inconsistent, the fonts aren't the same, the sizing, the spacing, the tabs, it's all random and it's inconsistent, it makes me think that the quality of your work will follow suit. You aren't particularly attentive to detail. But when I see a resume that is clean and crisp and professional looking, it's got lots of white space, you're giving me bite-sized chunks of information to process at a time instead of giving me ginormous paragraphs to read all at once. Bite-sized pieces. That makes me think of you as professional and organized and clean. Consciously or unconsciously, that's the effect it has. So give the look of your resume and cover letter the attention that it deserves. So let's not make any of these mistakes. Don't list your current work info as the best way to contact you. Provide one phone number and one email that are professional sounding, and make that voicemail something's professional as well. None of this, your kids answering the phone being all cute or dogs barking Christmas carols or anything like that. Make it professional. And instead of just focusing on your needs, keep it in your mind, but don't present to me that way. Present yourself as the solution to my problems. Don't give in to typos. Proofread thoroughly. Make sure that the message is what you want it to be. And don't be too wordy. Find that balance. Be concise, but still be impactful. And instead of just throwing something together, spend a little bit of time to clean it up. Use easy to read fonts, and give some consideration to your spacing, your margins, and all that kind of thing. Make the look clean. Well, here again, we've got some doozies when it comes to resume and cover letter. Doozy number 1 is submitting the same resume for every application. Oh my goodness, I see this all the time. It is such a big mistake. When you submit the cookie cutter resume for every application that you apply for, all you're doing is making yourself blend into the crowd. You know why? Because the cookie cutter version has to include everything for all the different nuances and all the different shades of types of roles that you'd be looking at. You have a resume that this type of role might want to know about this. This type of role might want to know about that. This type of role might want to know about this. So you have everything in there. Well, what have you done? You've made me read a bunch of stuff that I don't care about. Oh, the next guy might, and he might not care about the stuff I care about. I said that earlier, didn't I? Don't make me read anything that I don't care about. No more words than are necessary. Not to mention, you've got to target your application, especially when it comes to branding and your wow statement, your impact statement in your summary paragraph of your resume. You've got to really catch my attention and aim that at the industry, at the company, at the role, even at the manager. What are their needs? Show me you're the answer. So that doesn't mean you start from scratch with every resume. That standard resume, that catch-all resume, is about 85 to 90% finished. But that last 10 to 15% is about massaging and tweaking, targeting, aiming it at me. What a difference it makes. And it doesn't take that much work. You just got to give some thought to what matters to this company and this role. And the same thing with your cover letter. The generic cover letter says something like, I've got all the skills you're looking for in this position, period. The targeted cover letter says, as you can see from the chart below, and you outline what they're looking for and how your skills line up, I'm really excited about this role because it's a great match for my experience in A, B, and C. Now, you're not going to regurgitate everything that's in your resume. Don't get me wrong. But it's an opportunity for you to connect the dots to me. So in both cases, don't just use the one-size-fits-all version of the resume or the cover letter. Doozy number 2, giving very little thought to that opening summary. A lot of times, I don't even see one on a resume. It just goes straight into your work experience. Think about your resume as being like a movie, and you'll hear me say this in the resume building e-learning module. If your resume is like a movie, that opening summary paragraph is your movie trailer. If you don't catch my attention, I'm not going to watch your movie. If you don't catch my attention in your summary, I'm not going to read your resume. It's that simple. So you've really got to give some time and attention to this to make it something that's really going to be provocative and attention grabbing. Doozy number 3 is leaving out your accomplishment statements. If you've got that classic resume that just lists your duties, you are putting me to sleep. And again, you're just blending in with the competition. You're not standing out. Accomplishment stories are what take your resume from being dull to being exciting. Doozy number 4, not even including a cover letter or using that generic one as I mentioned earlier. When you don't include a cover letter, you make yourself look like a job spammer. You know what that is? A job spammer is that guy who can't be bothered to read all of the different ads that he might want to apply for and figure out which ones would be appropriate to submit his application to. And so he just gets in power mode and he just goes to a website and he just goes click, 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 click. He spends an hour doing that, not even thinking. And he sends his resume to every posting on that entire site. And his thinking is, well, I don't want to have to read all these ads, so I'll send my application in, and if I'm qualified, I'll hear back from the company, and if I'm not, I won't. Well, when you do that, of course, they're not sending in a cover letter. Try to imagine how annoying that is to the hiring manager or the recruiter or the HR when they're reading applications that say ballerina for a role that says astronaut. So when you send in an application with no cover letter, that's the first thing that's going to pop into their head. Are you a spammer? So not only do you not want to have that happen, but you want to take that opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to really drive home, connect the dots as to why this role is the perfect fit for your skills. So let's not make any of these mistakes. Instead of submitting the same resume, customize it, target it to your audience. Instead of just having no summary or just slapping one together, give it the time it deserves. It really makes a difference to whether I even read your resume. And instead of just having a list of your duties, show your value. Tell me your CAR stories. CAR stands for challenge, action, and most importantly, the results that you got in your role. Don't just list your duties. And instead of having no cover letter or a generic one, no, use what's called a T letter cover letter. And there's a sample of this on the Career Now website under Job Search Resources to pattern yours after, to really make that connection with the role in specifically. Here's what they're asking for. Here's what I've got. Show the connections. Not only that, but you'll find that that is also a very important consideration to getting you past a software scan. Because the software scan, if you take verbatim out of the ad for column 1 of your comparison chart, boom, 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 all the things that were listed in the ad, well, those are the very things that the software is scanning for. So you make sure that you'll pass that scan. There's much more information, of course, on these topics in the resume building e-learning module. Our next section has to do with interviewing. Mistake number 1 when it comes to interviewing is showing up late. What a great way to make a terrible impression. So be on time. Don't be too early, but be punctual. Mistake number 2 is you dress inappropriately. You're either overdressed or you're underdressed for the interview. A lot of people struggle with this. Well, what do I wear? What do I wear? My rule of thumb is this. What would you wear if you got that job? What would you wear to work every day? Now, take that and bump it up a notch. So if you would normally wear jeans and a t-shirt to this job, then for the interview, put on some nice semi-casual pants, some decent looking shoes, and perhaps an open-necked dress shirt or a golf shirt, polo shirt, something of that nature. Or if you would normally wear a sports jacket, well, throw on a tie. Ladies, same thing, you know. If you, whatever you would normally wear, maybe dress it up a little bit with a jacket or a scarf or some jewelry, something like that. Just kick it one notch higher than what you would wear normally. You certainly don't want to be underdressed, but you don't want to be too overdressed either. Don't show up in a tux for a role. Don't even show up in a suit if you would normally wear jeans and a t-shirt. That would be overdressing. Mistake number 3, forgetting that you're being interviewed from the moment you walk in, sometimes even before. Remember, mistake number 1 was being late? Well, suppose that you're late for an interview and you are driving like you know what to get there, and you're weaving in and out of traffic, cutting people off. Well, what are you going to do if the last person you cut off on the way to the interview follows you into the parking lot because they work there too? How do you undo that terrible first impression? Or when you walk in and you speak with the receptionist, do you realize how often the hiring manager will, after you've left, will walk out and ask the receptionist, so what did you think of our candidate? And get their feedback, get their impression. So treat every interaction like it's part of the interview. I can tell you a story of a gentleman who went to an interview in a big office building, and he was there on time. He was there a few minutes early, as a matter of fact. And he had time to get himself a coffee. There was a Starbucks in the lobby, and he went and got his coffee, and the server messed up his order. And because he'd had a fairly stressful week, that's partly why he wanted to get early and relax with a coffee a little bit before he had to do his interview. He kind of snapped at her. And there was a bit of a scene in the line. A lady behind him, told him to calm down, and he kind of snapped at her too. And so he got his coffee fine and sat down, got his composure, went up for the interview, and guess who was behind the desk? That same lady that he'd snapped at in line. So you can cost yourself quite easily by not keeping this in mind, that you are being scrutinized and you are being interviewed, even by people other than the interviewing manager. Mistake number 4, not paying attention. It is a very easy mistake to make because in the interview, especially if you've taken the Strategies for Interviewing Success e-learning module, You learn that there's 5 techniques for how to handle pretty much any interviewing question that you could possibly want to that you would encounter. But the cautionary note here is that if you start thinking too quickly about, well, which technique am I going to use to answer this question? You stop listening to the question. It starts off and you think you know where it's going, and you start formulating your answer in your head, but you weren't listening when the question took a detour that you didn't anticipate, and you missed that entirely, and now you're answering the wrong question. And now you're showing me that you are at best inattentive. And at worst, what if I interpret that as you're being evasive and trying not to answer the question that I asked you? See? So make sure you listen very carefully and answer the question that's actually being asked. Mistake number 5 is you're going to make mistakes in an interview, but are you going to beat yourself up over them, or are you going to learn from them? Everybody, we want to mitigate the mistakes as much as possible. That's what the strategies for interviewing success module is all about. But when you make a mistake, learn from it. Sit down after every interview and jot down your thoughts, your notes, because you're going to want that down the road later, because when you follow up after an interview, you need to reconnect the dots. Talk about the things that you discussed in that previous interview to really reconnect and reestablish why this is a great fit. And I'll tell you, you may remember the details now, but what about a week or 2 later? Are you going to remember all the details down the road? And what if you've had other interviews in the meantime? You're going to start mixing them up. So write down what happened in that interview. And when you've made mistakes, think about what you could have done differently and implement that the next time. So don't show up late. Be punctual. Don't overdress or underdress. 1 notch above whatever you would wear for the role. Always be aware that you are being observed, and be professional and considerate to everybody you meet. Don't let your mind drift. Don't stop listening. Be very careful to answer the right questions. And when you make mistakes, review and make improvements. Well, once again, there are bigger mistakes even than those. So doozy number 1 when it comes to interviewing is failing to prepare. The last thing you want to do in an interview is wing it. Be prepared. Consider what questions you're likely to be asked and give some thought to your answers. Practice them, record them, play them back to yourself, and see whether you would be impressed with that answer. You'll be amazed at how much better your delivery can be when you do this. Play your answers back to yourself and give yourself the opportunity to see yourself from the other side of the desk and work on your delivery. Work on the questions you need to ask in an interview in order to figure out, is this the right fit, and how do things go on around here? What are the top priorities? What's the focus? What's the future hold for this industry and for this company and for this role, so that you can connect the dots. Again, that's your job when it comes to the interview. Connect the dots for the interviewer to realize you'd be the perfect solution to our problems. Well, if you don't know what those problems are, that's going to be tough to do. So prepare your questions to get to the heart of the matter and figure out, what is it? Where's the pain? So I can show you how I can help you alleviate it. Doozy number 2, speaking negatively about a past manager or company. This may seem self-evident, but it happens a lot. And the reason it happens a lot, especially in an interview, is that you may be asked things like, well, why did you leave your last role? Tell me about a time when you had a problem with your manager or with a fellow worker. How did you handle it? Those questions are part of interviewing strategies these days on the part of the interviewer. They want to see how you handle difficult curveball questions. They want to put you under some pressure to see how you handle it. And if you're not ready for those kind of questions, it's really easy to start feeling defensive and backpedaling and deflecting the question. And, well, I don't want them to think that I did anything stupid. So you start throwing your former manager under the bus and telling him what an idiot he is. Well, again, what are you doing? You're showing me that you do the same to me. So I don't want to hear you talk negatively. I want to hear you talk professionally even when you're tempted and pressured to do otherwise, because that tells me what you'd likely do if you worked for me too. Doozy number 3, not asking those questions. If you just think that the interview is about answering questions, you're missing half of what you need to accomplish in that interview. So prepare them. And doozy number 4 is bringing up salary too early. You are at a leverage disadvantage if you talk salary at the beginning of the interview, which means you never want to bring it up yourself until they're ready to make an offer to you. Folks, that's the point at which you're on an even playing field, because the more they talk to you, the more they want you. So you're gaining leverage over them. They come to appreciate your value. But the reverse is also true, isn't it? The more time you spend in the interview process, the more energy, the more effort, the more you want the job, and therefore they have leverage over you when it comes to salary. But they're always going to have more leverage over you than you are over them until they reach that point. And the reason, by the way, that they have more leverage is because you've knocked yourself out. You've got a lot at stake here. They've got other candidates that they're still screening. So they're not as under the gun as you. They want you, but they're not as pressured as you are. So they're going to have leverage until they reach the point where they decide, we want you. When they're ready to make you an offer, that's when you want to talk salary, because now your leverage is equal to theirs because they've committed, they've made the decision. And trust me, folks, if you're thinking, I've had lots of people say, oh, come on, that I'm never going to be equal. They're always going to have the hammer. Believe me when I tell you, you talk to HR folks and they will candidly acknowledge that when they reach that point, they've put in a lot of work at this point too, screening all the candidates. And once they decide that you're the one they want, they don't want to lose you. They want this to get over with, and they want the decision to be made in favor of both parties. They want you and them to both be happy. So you do have leverage in much greater amount at that point. So you don't ever want to bring up salary too early. Matter of fact, you don't bring it up at all. The trouble is, they may bring it up, right? That might be the first question they ask you. It might be even before the interview. It might even be part of the application process. But under those circumstances, that's where we need to learn to defer. Because a question of salary expectations really can't be properly answered until you know a number of details about this job and about this company. For example, what are the responsibilities of this role? Is it exactly the same as what you had previously? So your previous salary may not even be relevant. Your salary expectations are going to depend on things like, well, if you are expected to be on call 24/7, and you might have to come into work at 10 at night, or you're going to have to work a lot of overtime for your salary, aren't you going to expect more money then? Of course you are. Well, you don't know that yet, do you? You don't know those details yet. Or how about things like the other elements of the company's compensation package? Things like signing bonuses or profit sharing, commissions, benefits, perks like phones and computers, cars, RSP contributions, stock options, vacation time. That's got financial value, and so on and so forth. All of those things will influence your expectations of salary. You don't know any of that yet, do you? So if that is the first question posed to you, you may be able to defer it very simply by saying, well, I'm happy to discuss that with you, but naturally that number will be influenced by, and you give them the list I just gave you, all these different things. So could we maybe defer that conversation until we've gone over those details, and then we could come up with a number that's a lot more solid? Now, any reasonable human being who hears that is going to think, yeah, you're right. Let's talk about it later. But on the other hand, what if you're not dealing with a reasonable human being? And what I mean by that is that they may have their hands tied. Maybe you're talking to low-level HR, or you're talking to a recruiter, and one of their clear mandates that they received from the employer was, we need to have this number. So they may hear your reasoning and think, well, yeah, that makes sense, but you know what? I got to give them a number. So then you would give them a range to avoid painting yourself into a corner. So you've got some room to negotiate and wiggle a little bit later. So do your research so you know, but don't paint yourself in a corner, and certainly don't you bring it up early in the process. If they're content to let that wait till later, you should be too, because that's when you're going to have leverage. That's a big one. So let's not make any of these mistakes. Don't wing this. Prepare, research, so you know the company's needs, so you can make the sale. That's what you're doing. You're selling yourself. And you've got to know the customer's needs before they'll buy your product, because you've got to show them that your product can do the job. And don't get tempted into speaking negatively about anybody. Take the high road. Keep your dignity and your composure. And don't just sit there and answer questions. Prepare the questions that you need to ask to figure out if this is going to be the right fit for you. And instead of bringing up salary, you wait for them. And if you can, even if they bring it up, try to defer it, because that's when you'll have equal leverage. Our last section is negotiating. And folks, all negotiating mistakes are doozies. Nothing is going to take the edge off of the victory that you will feel when you land your next role, like finding out you could have had $10,000, $20,000 more than what you ended up getting. So let's not get this far and then make these kind of negotiating mistakes. So doozy number one is panicking. You've put so much into this. You've come so far. You finally found a role that you like, and the company wants you, and you don't want to lose it. So you say something like, my salary negotiation, or my salary expectations rather, are negotiable. Well, what have you done? You've invited me to lowball you, haven't you? One of my colleagues has an expression that I'm very fond of. She says, just because you're looking for work doesn't mean you're on sale. So know your value. Know the market for the role you're targeting. Check out websites like Indeed.com, Payscale.com, Salary.com. Do your research to find out what this role is worth. Talk to your networking connections. If you've got somebody that you've been talking to in the company, they probably have a pretty good idea as to what this role is worth. So do your research so that you don't panic. And I'm telling you, this panic can rear its ugly head very suddenly. So don't let that happen. Doozy number two, going to the other extreme, drawing a line in the sand. Well, I'm not going to take this job unless A, B, and C. There's a lot of ways to get paid. And it's not always salary. Money is money, folks. If I give you a car, that's just as good as me giving you roughly $10,000. That's basically what it saves you over the course of a year, in repairs and payments and gas and stuff like that. So be open to other possibilities. Don't be confrontational and aggressive. Doozy number three, when you get an offer, do not respond to it immediately. Whether you think it's a good offer or a bad offer, you don't accept it and you don't reject it immediately. You always receive it graciously and appreciatively. Thank you very much. Let me take this home, if that's okay, and look it over. I'll talk with my family about it. Would it be all right if I got back to you in a day or two? Oh, sure, that'd be fine. Give yourself the opportunity for sober second thought, the opportunity to sleep on it, because I promise you, you're going to feel differently, perhaps better, perhaps worse, about that offer once you've done that. When you wake up tomorrow and look at it again, your feelings will change. So don't do this. Don't respond immediately. And doozy number four is you make an agreement and don't get it in writing. Now, that won't always be a problem, but here's where it will. If part of your agreement was for things like future options or future reviews, perhaps a performance review that would lead to a raise. Let's say, for example, if one of the ways of bridging the gap between what the company wanted to pay and what you wanted to get paid was to say, well, why don't we do a performance review after 6 months? And If I'm meeting your expectations, then my salary will bump up, and if not, well, then it will stay where it is. Okay, what happens now if 6 months down the road you go to your manager and say, okay, I'm ready for my performance review, and they say, what are you talking about? Now, that doesn't have to be because they're doing you dirty. They may just have forgotten about that part of the discussion, because that wasn't part of their original offer. It wasn't what they came in thinking about. It was something that they agreed to on the spot, and they may have forgotten. Or what happens if in the meantime your manager moves on, and now the new manager comes in, and you say, all right, it's time for my performance review, and they say, what are you talking about? Well, I agreed with my foreman. And they go, well, can you show me that? And you got nothing in writing. Or you come in and say, all right, it's time for my review, but you never nailed down what you'd be reviewed on. That's a very subjective thing, isn't it? Well, yeah, I don't think you're performing well enough for me to pay you that extra amount of money. Well, what were they gauging you on? If you haven't got that spelled out, you're letting yourself in for a difficult situation down the road. So this isn't that hard to get an agreement in writing. As a matter of fact, in many cases, the company will offer you something in writing. They'll make their offer in a written form. If they don't, a simple thing like if they make you a verbal offer, you might say, fabulous, that's really great, I really appreciate that. Listen, I'd like to take this home and review it with my family. Would it be possible to get that in writing so that I can do that? Or if you're dealing with somebody, here's where you got to use a little bit of diplomacy. There are people in the business world, even yet today, who are very much the my handshake is my bond, my word is my bond type of people. And they may sincerely, they're not being shady, they may sincerely feel that their word should be good enough, and they might even be a little offended if you handle this improperly. So be diplomatic about it. But if you, again, be sensitive to the vibe. If you get the feeling that for one reason or another, it wouldn't be appropriate to ask them to put it in writing, then you put it in writing. When you say, thanks for the offer, I really appreciate this. I'd like to go home and talk about this with my family. Get back to you in a couple of days if that's all right. Sure, okay, that's fine. All right, so you go home today. What are you going to do? You're going to sit down and type up an email thanking Mr. Jones for the offer and for the opportunity to talk about this role with him, and say, I just wanted to make sure that I'm not missing anything and that we're both on the same page here. So I've outlined the items that we discussed today. Can you just make sure that I haven't missed anything? And when he responds like, yep, that's got it. Okay, you've got something in writing now. You can keep that email safe, so that if down the road you should need it, you've got something in writing. You'll save yourself a whole lot of headaches, folks, if you get your agreement in writing. So let's not panic. Let's do our research and know what we're worth and stick to that. But let's not go to the other extreme where we get aggressive and confrontational. Be collaborative in the approach to bridging the gap between the two numbers that you're dealing with. And never respond to an offer on the spot. Give yourself the opportunity for sober second thought. And always, always, always get your agreement in writing for you to refer to later. So folks, those are our mistakes. And there's quite a few of them, aren't there? And if you're aware of these things and review them, you're going to find that you can avoid them quite easily. And I hope you appreciate too that we didn't just identify the mistakes. We also uncovered the right things to do. And those are the things that you really want to put into practice. So having reviewed some of the key job search mistakes that you need to avoid, let's also review the proper techniques that all job seekers need to know. Just to remind you of the other e-learning modules that are available to you. All job seekers need to be aware of the right type of resume and the right format of resume to be effective, and how a cover letter can really help their cause. They also need to prepare the other job search tools like business cards and networking briefs and LinkedIn profiles and things like that to enhance their search. They need to have the right approach to the market, knowing about the proactive versus the reactive, the hidden job market versus the visible job market, and that means they need to learn how to network properly. and they need to know how to handle an interview situation. We've touched on all of these things here today, haven't we? But there's much more to each of those topics. And, well, we've talked about the fundamental job search mistakes to avoid here today, haven't we? And then also, how do you keep your job search moving forward? Well, there's all kinds of assistance available to you through your program with Career Now. All of these topics are covered in, first of all, our e-learning modules. So if you haven't already done these, check out the e-learning modules, Should I Change Careers, Resume Building, Networking for Job Search, and Interviewing Success. And if you feel that you would benefit from some one-to-one assistance, well, that's available to you as well. You can arrange for personal coaching, one-to-one conversations with a career consultant to help you to stay on point and make sure you're doing all of the best things, best practices that we've enforced through these e-learning modules. And if you want some really hands-on assistance with your resume, we've got 2 different types of resume services. In addition to the resume building e-learning module, if you want some one-to-one assistance, we've got a really intense version with the editing service, where we'll work with you one-to-one to craft your resume from scratch if we have to. Or we've got the resume polish service, where you've already got a resume you're pretty happy with. Maybe you've constructed it from the resume building presentation, and you just want somebody to give it the once-over, format it, and polish up and make it sound good. Well, we can do that as well. And then, of course, we can also help you with your cover letter construction, putting together that really effective T-letter cover letter. So all of these things are available from Career Now. So check out the site and schedule your appointment, or access the other e-learning modules. Again, folks, thanks for joining me for this discussion of job search mistakes to avoid, and we'll look forward to interacting with you in other e-learning modules, as well as the personal coaching as you go through your job search.